Our main story tonight concerns books. You know, beloved works like The Great Gatsby, Charlotte's Web and The Berenstain Bears. And you might think Berenstain is misspelled there. You might remember it as S-T-E-I-N, but that's wrong. It's a weird Mandela effect thing that a lot of people misremember, but it's always been the Berenstain Beavers. It was always spelled with an A. Specifically, we're going to be talking about public libraries, which, of course, lend books, but increasingly have become so much more than that.
Sure, you can check out books and DVDs here at Placentia Library, but now you can also check out one of these.
You can also check out a fishing pole and keep it for 3 weeks. You can check out a really neat telescope and have a star party with your family.
Alongside books and movies are things like air fryers and bundt cake pans.
If you want to plant a garden, we have seeds that you can check out.
I don't know of anywhere else that they can borrow a mounted sandhill crane and just study it up close.
Yeah, I'll bet there isn't anywhere else that you can borrow a mounted sandhill crane because, according to taxidermy.net message boards, they're very difficult to mount. When a user named Eric asked for sandhill crane mounting information before I tackle these tall guys, one person said, so you know in advance you will use every curse word when you are wiring the legs, while someone called Greg suggested contacting a magazine that had covered the topic recently, saying, quote, I am not a bird guy, but I remember reading that article and thinking it was fairly easy, which, shut up, Greg! Sit this one out. Eric's clearly stressing you, telling him to call a magazine. He's reaching out to his community for support, and you're not that community right now. You're not a bird guy? Well, this is a bird guys only convo, OK, Greg? Fuck you! The point is, at some libraries, you can now borrow pretty much anything from a fishing pole to a leaf blower to seeds to a copy of a Berenstain Badgers book. Again, your memory is wrong. Berenstain Badgers was always spelled B-A-R. There was never an E in there. Not just that, though. Libraries offer internet access, translation help, notary services, printing, and a bunch of other necessities. They're also a refuge for unhoused people or those without air conditioning or heating, all of which explains why libraries are incredibly popular, garnering an estimated 4 million visits every day, mostly by young adults, women, and low-income households. But as you probably know from the fact that I'm talking about libraries right now, they're in trouble, because they've become another front in the ongoing culture war. We've talked before about how Conservatives have targeted school libraries, but those debates have now emphatically migrated over to public libraries as well, with residents spouting talking points like these.
I do not want our children, grandchildren seeing these books. I feel they're damaging psychologically.
It isn't left versus right, but it's right versus wrong. These books are wrong, and they're destroying our community.
Books in our taxpayer-funded libraries make the jobs of human and child traffickers easier.
OK, that last one sounds a little hard to believe unless one of the books at that library happens to be child trafficking for dummies. But those aren't isolated instances. The American Library Association documented efforts to censor over 4,200 unique book titles last year in schools and libraries, the highest level they've ever recorded, with the number of titles targeted for censorship at public libraries in particular rising by 92% from the previous year. And that's not all. Bomb threats have been called into libraries across the country, and librarians themselves have been the recipients of some pretty nasty abuse.
I had heard people saying that I was a pedophile, I was grooming kids.
People in my profession called pedophiles and like these horrible, horrible things.
I can say unequivocally we are not pedophiles or groomers, and I can say that on behalf of our staff. That is not why we go into public service or librarianship.
Yeah, of course not. That is why you go into the clergy. Everybody knows that. We all know. So, given all of this, tonight, let's talk about public libraries, why they're under attack, where these challenges are coming from, and what the consequences might be. And let's start with how public libraries operate, because generally, they receive the vast majority of their funding from local government sources, and they're typically overseen by a local library board, which can either be elected or appointed by members of the local government. And librarians actually get rid of books all the time through a process known as weeding. Weeding is done for all sorts of good reasons, like a book being out of date, severely damaged, or simply so weird no one wants to check it out anymore. Books like Body Watching is Fun, Latanya the Naughty Horse Learns to Say No to Drugs, and the Christian child discipline classic, God, the Rod and Your Child's Bod. Fun fact, a new copy of that is currently selling on Amazon for $214. So if you don't want to pay that, you better hope your local library has it. Or you know what? You can actually just borrow my copy here instead. It's fine. But what we're talking about tonight isn't weeding. It's books being removed or relocated from one section to another purely for their content. And most libraries already have a book challenge protocol, allowing anyone who feels that a book violates its selection policies to submit a formal request for reconsideration, after which staff will review the complaint and decide whether to leave it, reshelve it, or remove it entirely. And you should know, there are some legal limits here. You can't just demand a book be banned, even if it is to protect the children. And that's because, through the years, the Supreme Court has recognised that speech cannot be suppressed solely to protect the young from ideas or images that a legislative body thinks unsuitable for them. But there's an exception when it comes to obscenity, which for minors is defined as material that appeals to their prurient interest, is offensive to prevailing standards about what is suitable for minors, and lacks serious literary, artistic, political or scientific value. The problem is, some have tried to apply that standard incredibly broadly. Take what happened in Huntington Beach, California, where the City Council mandated that library books containing any content of sexual nature be moved away from anyone under 18.
At the direction of the Huntington Beach City Council, librarians at the Central Library are starting to sort through thousands of books in the children's section. Their task, according to officials, is to relocate books that contain, quote, sexual content. Library staff began in the health section and pulled books pertaining to the human body and puberty. We also saw books about boats that were being moved. A peek at the pages show a child in a bathtub playing with toy boats and a sketch of early explorers.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. And it wasn't just shirtless rowers and kids in tubs that got flagged. That resolution ultimately relocated books like Own Your Period, Puberty is Gross but Also Really Awesome, and Everyone Poops to the adult section of the library. And it is ridiculous to do that, especially when you're keeping Shel Silverstein books in the kids' area. Books which contain actual author photos like this one. If a kid borrows Runny Babbitt, reads it to the end and sees that photo, don't be surprised if their first question is, Mummy, what's big dick energy? And that is not an isolated case. In one town in Texas, officials removed 3 books from the I Need a New Butt series, which is a children's book about a boy who needs a new butt because his has a crack. And I haven't read it yet, so don't spoil the end by telling me if he gets one or not. They also pulled 4 books about farts, starring a goose, a snowman, a heart and a leprechaun. And first, you've got to be pretty stupid to believe that they are harmful to children. And second, it does seem that you can make a killing writing books about farting, because there are so many of them, including, and these are all real, ones about farting flamingos, farting unicorns, farting turkeys, farting princesses, farting dragons, and of course, Gary the farting gingerbread man. And while those instances were one-offs, increasingly, the list of books challenged at libraries can be suspiciously similar. And that is because challenges are often coming through highly organised groups, often conservative and extremely religious, who are compiling and sharing lists of books to oppose. Up until 2021, the vast majority of challenges only sought to remove or restrict a single book. But now, 93% of them involve attempts to censor multiple titles, with more than half involving 100 or more books. And that starts to make sense when you see how these groups operate. Take Clean Up Samuels, which is sadly not a group organised around the collective goal of washing as many guys named Samuel as possible. Instead, it refers to Samuel's Public Library in Front Royal, Virginia. The group's held events at which people filled out over 500 forms challenging nearly 150 books, with one event promising beer and babysitting, which might be the most divorced dad activity I can think of. OK, kids, get in the car. I need to go protect your innocence by drinking beer and looking at babysitters. Those book challenges heavily targeted books with LGBTQ+ characters or themes, with people frequently admitting, when asked if they'd read the books in full, that they hadn't, with answers ranging from no to who that is normal could get through it to I looked at the summary, it told me all I needed to know. And that is possible because these groups often find problematic books by scanning websites and Facebook pages that list them, like Mary in the Library, Rated Books, and perhaps the most prevalent, Book Looks. And for a site set up as a moral crusader, it is a bit weird that in their logo, the B and the L are fucking. I mean, like, definitely fucking, right? I know sometimes I project horniness, when it isn't there, except for that Shel Silverstein photo, because I'm dying on that hill. But I'm having a genuinely hard time seeing anything in that logo that isn't a strong B taking a willing L and absolutely breaking its back. Booklooks rates books on a 0 to 5 scale from least to most objectionable, sometimes including a handy chart noting the amount of times that certain words are used. For instance, this is the chart for the book Wicked. And I'll just say, if there was a party game where you had to guess a book or movie based solely on one of those charts, you could sell, no exaggeration, 10 million of those games. OK, so let me see. It's a novel from 2001, 24 fucks. Ooh, so it's not Life of Pi, not the other Boleyn girl. Hang on, 9 dicks? Wait, is it Choke by Chuck Palahniuk? Yes! 24 fucks, yes, I love this game! Even our book, A Day in the Life of Marlon Brando, which has been challenged a bunch in libraries, is criticised for featuring alternate sexualities and controversial political and social commentary, citing the illustration on this page depicts 2 male rabbits holding paws as a human would hold another person's hand. The rabbits are discussing how much they love each other and want to marry one another. You know, filth. But that is clearly nonsense. If there is anything controversial in our book, it's that the animals dress up for weddings, but at other times they're mostly naked, except for this badger whose arms turn into sleeves. And even then, the problem isn't the implied nakedness, it's just the lack of consistency there. Now, to be fair, some titles on these lists do contain explicit content. In some cases, they're books about puberty, and others, they may be meant for teenagers and contain references to sex, which is exactly why they're not shelved with children's books to begin with. Libraries generally have an adult section, a young adult section, and a kids section. It is not like teen books with explicit content are shelved right next to the Berenstain Bees book. Yeah, it's always been spelled E-E-N. Your memory's just very bad. But the content often gets framed in extremely misleading ways. For instance, the book Let's Talk About It has been repeatedly challenged. It's billed as the teen's guide to sex, relationships and being a human. And here's how one mom in Iowa argued for it to be restricted at her local library.
When I initially read this book, I was filled with anger. Quote, sending or getting an unwanted, saucy something from a partner or individual can be the highlight of your day, period. It is thrilling, sexy, and fun. The online world is also a chock block full of pornography professionals and amateurs alike sharing their sexy adventures online. There is nothing wrong with enjoying some porn. It is a fun, sugary treat. I have to pause because no matter how many times I say these words, it scares me.
OK. First, porn is a sugary treat. Sounds like the tagline for an upcoming X-rated spin on gummy bears, an adult film that either exists already or will shortly after this episode ends. But look, those words are in the book. And if you go on Booklooks, you'll see they're quoted on their review page. But if you actually read the book itself, you'll see that they are surrounded by a lot of careful advice. For instance, that one line about sexting has a ton of context around it, with advice like get prior consent, don't share or spread the photos you receive, and wait till you're a legal adult to do it. As for that sugary treat line, it is part of a long, thoughtful discussion that includes, among many other things, that porn can create unrealistic expectations, the people you see on camera are real human beings who deserve your respect, and if the amount of porn you watch feels like it's impacting your life, then it's probably time to pull back and give it some thought, which is good advice. And in a country where 17 states provide abstinence-only sex education, it might be the most honest discussion about porn some teens get, especially if they have the kind of mom who has a fucking panic attack at the very idea of it. And while she will say that she just wanted the library to require parental permission to access the book, which is still a big barrier to a teenager who might need to read it, there have been other attempts to try and get it out of libraries altogether. And you do get the sense that people who want to censor these books can have no real idea of what's inside them, or indeed, if they're even at the libraries they're protesting at all, as happened in Idaho.
5 years ago, this was anointed the best small library in America. Today, the trustees are facing a recall. The director just resigned.
Do you feel that you've given in? That you've been defeated here? That
part of me does, yes. But they start showing up at your house, guns on their hips and Bible tracts in their hands.
Activists demanding that the library ban more than 400 books, like genderqueer.
Even if we do nothing to you, eventually, if you don't repent of wanting to harm our children with pornography, that's up to God.
Things need to change. Otherwise, you bring curses upon yourselves, period. From the Most High.
Are any of those books in the library?
Not a single one.
Yeah, it's true. Activists demanded that books they hadn't read be removed from a library that didn't have them. Which, as far as protests go, is about as meaningful as marching to the Hollywood sign to demand Frankie Muniz return his Oscar for Schindler's List. He's not there, he wasn't in that, and the very fact that you're protesting this tells me you're probably not familiar with the material. And even after that group was told the library didn't have any of the 400 books they wanted banned, they demanded its board pass a policy promising not to order controversial books, or if they did, to place them in an adults-only room. They also asked the library to judge books under God's standards and not of the world's standards. And you know God, the freak known for building the nude garden he could watch all day. The guy who commissioned the construction of an all-animal fuckboat and who sat back and watched while his own son got nailed. Oh, I'm sorry, am I misunderstanding the Bible by taking things out of context? Forgive me, I haven't read it. I looked at the summary. It told me all I needed to know. And it is worth taking a moment on the book they mentioned there, Genderqueer, because it is the most frequently challenged book in America for the last 3 years running. It's a graphic novel that's the memoir of an author's struggles with gender identity, but it's often reduced out of context to some of its most explicit passages, one of which, you may remember, was read aloud in the Senate last year by John Kennedy.
I got a new strap-on harness today. I can't wait to put it on you. It will fit my favorite dildo perfectly. You're going to look so hot. I can't wait to have your cock in my mouth. I'm going to give you the blowjob of your life. Then I want you inside of me.
That clip is just a perfect mix of being horrendously disorienting and kind of delightful. It's like watching a dog walk on its hind legs and then watching the same dog say, I can't wait to have your cock in my mouth. Now, it is not unreasonable to say that shouldn't be shelved directly alongside the picture books in the children's section of the library. And you know who agrees with that? The author of the fucking book.
I don't think the book is for children, but I do think that it is appropriate for teen readers, and also that libraries have books for all ages, and you shelve them with signage, and people browse and find the books that they need in a library. And not every book in a library is for every reader, but they still need to be available.
Exactly. It's not a children's book, which is why it's not shelved with them. And that author raises an important distinction there. Some books aren't appropriate for 5-year-olds, but might be if you're 16, because those are two very different phases of life that we don't treat the same way. It's why a 16-year-old driving a car is perfectly legal, and a 5-year-old driving a car is a news story. And yet, for some, keeping books like Genderqueer out of the kids section, where, again, it isn't, still isn't enough.
Children are very literal. They're very impressionable. They're going to look at those pictures and they very much look like children in the pictures. Sex isn't for kids. It has serious consequences. We should not be encouraging them to engage in sexual acts.
In Lapeer, the book is shelved in the adult section, but Park says it's still attractive to children.
I mean, it's beautiful. It really is. It's nature. So I think this would attract any child because it looks like it's cartoonish.
But it's in the adult section. If a child finds it, it's because they're somewhere that they're not supposed to be. So if anything, the kid should get into trouble, not the book. And honestly, that is where the rod comes in. Look, he's eating cookies on the cover. He needs to be stopped. The argument is basically, this can't be on library shelves because a kid could somehow find it. But that is something to which this understandably exasperated librarian in Louisiana has a pretty good response.
I have parents who want these books out of the library because they don't want adults to have access. Because what if my child goes in the adult section? If your child is in the library by itself, or their self, sorry, they probably have a phone. In which case, my library is the least of your problems.
Right. This entire debate basically ends the second you remember the existence of the internet. If your child has a phone, they already have access to the most sexualised images you could imagine, by which, of course, I mean this uppercase B taking L on a one-way trip to Pound Town like they're the last two letters trying to start a new alphabet. And look, thankfully, not all these challenges are successful. That mom's efforts to get Let's Talk About It restricted at her local library failed. But in many places, even if that happens, the fight isn't over. Because these groups will then campaign to replace members of library boards, sometimes doing so with wildly misleading claims, like in this ad endorsing two Conservative board candidates.
Hi, Mom. I'm home.
Hi, honey. I'm in the kitchen. How are you today? How was school?
We went to the library today, and there's a special room for kids. And this funny lady, she read us a book, and she showed us all the pictures in the book. Mommy?
Yes, honey.
What's anal sex?
OK, so there is lots wrong with that, including that no kid hears the words anal sex and then is like, I'm going to ask my mum about that later. No way. You go to your friend with the oldest older sister and sit with her the whole bus ride home. Also, it is not important, but where the fuck was she going with that dish? I'm not trying to Monday morning quarterback her process. Everything else about her dishwashing is totally normal. You get dressed in your regular chores outfit, no gloves and a spotless sundress. Check and check. Then you wash dishes without any soap. That all makes sense to me, but why would she hold a soaking wet, unsoaped dish instead of putting it back in the sink? You're going to put it away? It's too wet for that lady. Is it heading for a drying rack? If so, why would it be so far away from the sink? Move your glass with one flower out of there and put a drying rack in its place, you dopey freak. But the thing is, the two candidates that ad was supporting won. And who is on the library board matters. In Campbell County, Wyoming, the library system's executive director refused to remove 17 books centred around the experiences of LGBTQ+ people. And I will note, not one of the requests to remove the books had come from a parent whose child looked at or checked out a book that their parent thought was inappropriate. Not one. And while the library board initially backed her, the county commission then quickly appointed 4 new members to the board, who then moved to fire her. Although, before the vote, they did get this impassioned speech from a local resident.
When you start outlawing books because of your personal, religious and moral beliefs in this country, you're going against the Constitution, you're going against what we were founded for, and you're personally an affront to myself and most of the people I know. This is a shit show, and I'm embarrassed for this board. Thank you.
Wow. I have to say, usually when you see a white guy with a bushy mustache holding a microphone at a town meeting, you get worried. But he proved my expectations wrong there. Kudos to you, guy I'd otherwise assume stormed the Capitol. But for all the support the argument to defend the library director got in that room, just a little later, the board did this.
I make a motion to vote for Terry Leslie's position to be terminated as the Campbell County Public Library Director.
All in favor?
Wow.
There you have
it.
Yeah, they fired her. And for what it's worth, you shouldn't be allowed to fire someone while wearing this dumb of a hat. That was bought on a beach day in Cabo. You screamed, how much, por favor, and how much De Niro? And the guy claimed he was giving you a deal while charging you double, and you were like, gracias. I'm going to wear this to the meeting where I fire a librarian despite public opposition. The Cabo hat I got for muy caro pendeja. That means on sale. Gracias, senor. Muy bien. The point is, these groups have all sorts of levers they can pull, and if all else fails, they can even try and cut the library's funding altogether. In Jamestown, Michigan, community members voted to defund a library after an intense campaign by residents who accused it of grooming children and promoting an LGBTQ ideology, despite the fact that of roughly 67,000 items in the library's collection, only around 90 of them had LGBTQ themes. Yet that vote eliminated 84% of their annual budget. So naturally, the library was immediately under threat of closing. And a board meeting afterward, one librarian pointed out that this was a natural consequence of voters' actions.
I am shocked that the people are surprised that the library will close.
You can't vote to eliminate funding for the library and say you don't want it to close. You can't say you're doing it just to send a message and not expect there to be consequences to your actions. It's not a symbolic move. It's a death sentence. And I hope the community is prepared to live with that.
Exactly. Why wouldn't the library close if most of its funding is cut? Any establishment, whether it's a business or a government service, needs money to operate. If you don't believe me, just visit your local circuit city and ask them to explain it to you. Now, thankfully, last November there was a vote to restore that library's funding through next year, and it passed comfortably. And that is the thing here. Protecting libraries is a fight, but it's also winnable. It just means standing up to all these bullshit attacks whenever they occur, and they are occurring a lot. This year alone, more than 100 bills have been introduced in state legislatures intended to ban or restrict material in school and public libraries, some of which are bonkers. Just last week, the Alabama House advanced a bill allowing librarians to be arrested for the content they allow on shelves. And Arkansas and Oklahoma have already passed laws to make it possible to prosecute librarians for distributing obscene content. This is all madness. And it speaks to the need for libraries to be vigorously defended. And I know it is not shocking that an episode of this show would advocate to support your local libraries. It's pretty much implicit in our whole vibe. My suit, glasses and desk all practically scream, support your local libraries. To which the rest of my body would say, out of respect, a shh. But depending on where you live, you might need to pay attention if people start showing up at your local library board meeting and reading ear-catching parts of young adult books, because while it is understandable for parents to want to have a say in what their kids can check out from the library, it is not their right to have a say in what can be checked out at all. And it frankly doesn't feel like a coincidence that so much of this conversation concerns LGBTQ themes, as it seems this is just the latest way to try and push that community out of public spaces, to send a message that their lives and stories aren't welcome, and by extension, to tell anyone growing up questioning that the answers are off-limits to them. All of which is just basically a long way of saying libraries badly need our support right now, so that they continue to serve the diverse needs of their communities, while also, of course, lending out air fryers, seeds, and copies of the Berenstain Cheetahs. We all loved those books as kids. Oh, and before we go tonight, in case there are any Book Look-type organisations doing a report on this show, I'll save you the trouble and do the chart myself. 10 fucks, 3 shits, 3 dicks and 3 cocks. Fuck off, Book Looks! Oh, look! I just made it 11! That's our show. Thanks so much for watching. Now, excuse me, I have something that I badly need to return to the library before midnight. Good night.